The night seemed like any other on a popular talk show, with the audience roaring with laughter at the host's sharp, politically charged humor. But in a shocking turn, the host shifted his focus to Barron Trump, the youngest son of the former president. The joke was quick, cutting, and unmistakably personal. Just when the laughter reached its peak, Barron Trump himself walked onto the stage, ready to confront the host live. What followed left everyone in the studio completely stunned. "Are you sure about this, Barron?" his publicist asked nervously, trailing behind him as he strode toward the stage entrance. "You don't owe anyone a response." Barron paused, turning to her with an expression so resolute it silenced her concerns. "It's not about what I owe," he said firmly. "It's about standing up for what's right." He pushed through the heavy black curtain, stepping into the spotlight of the live broadcast. The audience gasped, the unexpected sight of the young Trump freezing everyone in place, including the host, who stood slack-jawed as Barron calmly approached the desk. The cameras zoomed in on Barron's face, his expression unshaken, his presence commanding. He adjusted the microphone placed on the desk in front of him and leaned in slightly. "You think mocking my family makes you clever?" he said, his voice steady but cutting. "Let's see how clever you are when I'm standing right in front of you." The room fell silent, the energy in the studio shifting in an instant. The host, visibly uncomfortable now, struggled to recover, his signature confidence faltering under the weight of Barron's gaze. No one could have predicted what would happen next. The silence in the studio was deafening. The host, usually so quick with a comeback, fumbled for words. He let out an awkward laugh, trying to diffuse the tension. "Well, Barron," he said, his voice shaky but laced with a forced bravado, "I didn't expect to see you here tonight. You sure know how to make an entrance?" Barron didn't flinch. He kept his eyes locked on the host, his calm demeanor doing more to unsettle the man than any angry outburst ever could. "I'm sure you didn't expect me," Barron replied, his voice steady, almost cold. "It's easy to make jokes about someone when you think they're not watching, isn't it?" The audience, who had been nervously chuckling moments ago, now sat in complete silence. All eyes were on the teenager, who had managed to turn the dynamic of the show upside down in mere seconds. The host shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable, but tried to regain control. "Come on, Barron," he said, forcing a grin. "It's all in good fun. You know how these shows work." Barron leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the desk, his face calm but his tone sharp. "Good fun?" he asked, his voice low but cutting through the silence. "When did mocking a teenager become good fun? When did cheap laughs take priority over basic decency?" The host's grin faltered. He opened his mouth to respond but quickly realized he had no answer. The audience began to murmur, some nodding in agreement with Barron's words. Barron seized the moment, his voice growing more resolute. "You want to criticize my father? Fine. He's a public figure. He can take it. But when you drag his family into it, when you attack someone who's done nothing to you, just for a laugh, that says more about you than it does about him. Or me." The audience erupted into applause, catching even Barron off guard for a brief moment. He hadn't come here seeking validation, but the reaction made it clear he wasn't alone in his feelings. The host sat back in his chair, visibly rattled, his usual air of confidence now replaced with discomfort. Barron wasn't finished. He turned his gaze to the camera, addressing not just the host, but the millions of viewers watching at home. "It's easy to tear people down," he said, his tone softer now but still firm. "It's harder to build something meaningful, to stand for something that matters. Maybe we should all think about that before we speak." The studio was filled with thunderous applause, and even some of the host's staunch supporters couldn't help but nod in agreement. Barron gave a small nod of acknowledgement to the audience before stepping back from the desk. The host, now visibly humbled, cleared his throat and attempted to regain control of the broadcast. "Well," he said awkwardly, "I think we've all learned something tonight. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Barron." Barron didn't wait for further comments. He turned and walked off the stage, his stride confident, leaving behind an audience that was no longer laughing but deeply reflective. The cameras followed him until he disappeared behind the curtains, and for a moment, the studio remained silent. The host shifted in his seat, clearly shaken but trying to maintain some semblance of professionalism. "We'll be right back," he said, his voice lacking its usual charm as the show cut to commercial. But everyone in the room knew that what had just happened wasn't going to be forgotten anytime soon. Backstage, Barron walked with a sense of calm determination, his face betraying no hint of the adrenaline rushing through his veins. His publicist trailed behind him, her expression a mix of pride and disbelief. "That was unexpected," she said, struggling to keep up. "I didn't think you'd actually go out there." Barron glanced at her, but said nothing, his focus elsewhere. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the flood of notifications and messages already pouring in. Clips of his confrontation with the host had already started circulating online, the headlines popping up faster than he could read them. Barron Trump stands his ground in live TV showdown. Young Trump takes on late-night host in unexpected confrontation. Barron Trump silences critics with poised, response to public mockery. Social media was ablaze with debates, some praising his courage, others accusing him of orchestrating the moment for attention. But one thing was undeniable. He had captured the world's attention. Meanwhile, back in the studio, the host sat at his desk, visibly shaken as his team scrambled to regroup during the commercial break. One of the producers approached him, whispering nervously. "This is blowing up online," she said, holding up her phone. "The clip's already trending. People are calling it a turning point." The host sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Turning point for who?" he muttered, more to himself than to her. He couldn't shake the image of Barron's piercing gaze, the way the young Trump had completely dismantled the dynamic of the show in just a few minutes. When the broadcast resumed, the host tried to regain his footing, cracking a few jokes to lighten the mood, but the energy in the room had shifted. The audience wasn't laughing as freely, their minds still replaying Barron's words. The host could feel the weight of what had just happened, and for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure how to move forward. Elsewhere, in the quiet of a parked car, Melania Trump watched the confrontation unfold on her phone. Her expression was unreadable, but her fingers hovered over the screen, pausing the video on a still frame of Barron standing tall, facing the host with unwavering confidence. She smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and bittersweet emotion flickering across her face. "That's my boy," she whispered softly, almost to herself. Back at home, the former president himself sat in his office, surrounded by advisors and aides, all eager to dissect what had just happened. Donald Trump leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips as he watched the clip for the third time. "He's got guts," he said finally, his tone almost proud. "Didn't see that coming, but he handled it better than most adults would." The advisors exchanged cautious glances, unsure how to respond. "The media is eating this up," one of them offered hesitantly. "It could play in your favor, sir. Makes the family look stronger." Trump waved him off, still focused on the screen. "It's not about how it played," he said, almost absent-mindedly. "It's about the message. He sent a clear one tonight." As the night wore on, the clip continued to spread, sparking debates across news channels, social media, and dinner tables. Some saw Barron's actions as a powerful stand against bullying and disrespect, while others dismissed it as an orchestrated publicity stunt. But no matter where people stood, one thing was certain. Barron Trump had stepped out of the shadows and into the spotlight, proving he was more than just the quiet son of a former president. Backstage at the studio, Barron sat alone for a moment, finally allowing himself to breathe. He pulled out his phone again, scrolling through the comments and reactions. Among the noise, one comment caught his eye. "Sometimes the loudest message doesn't need to be shouted." "Well done, Barron." He smiled faintly, pocketing his phone as his publicist walked over. "Ready to leave?" she asked. Barron nodded, standing up. "Let's go." As he walked out of the building and into the night, he felt a strange sense of calm. Tonight had been a turning point, not just for the audience, not just for the host, but for him. And as he stepped into the car waiting for him outside, he knew this was just the beginning. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like and subscribe. As the days passed, the confrontation between Barron Trump and the late-night host continued to dominate headlines and social media. News channels dissected every moment of the exchange. Panelists debated the ethics of comedy targeting a teenager, and hashtags like Barron speaks in respect. The youngest began trending worldwide. The conversation had shifted from a single joke to a broader cultural reckoning about respect, boundaries, and the power of standing up for oneself. For Barron, the aftermath was surreal. He hadn't sought fame or attention, but overnight, he had become a symbol of resilience and grace under pressure. Interviews flooded in from major networks, opinion pieces praised his poise, and even critics who had dismissed him as just a kid were forced to acknowledge the impact he had made. Back at home, Melania and Donald Trump watched the fallout closely. Melania, ever protective of her son, had mixed emotions. "She's handling this better than I expected," she admitted during breakfast one morning, scrolling through an article about Barron's unexpected rise to the spotlight. Donald, sipping his coffee, nodded with a grin. "He's got the Trump genes," he said confidently. "We thrive under pressure." Melania gave him a pointed look. "It's not just about thriving, Donald. He's shown maturity beyond his years. But we need to be careful. This kind of attention can be overwhelming." Donald waved off her concern. "He's fine. Look at him. He's already handling it better than most politicians. And if this keeps the media busy, even better." Meanwhile, the host who had been at the center of the controversy was facing his own reckoning. The backlash against his joke had been swift and unforgiving. Sponsors began pulling ads from his show, citing the incident as a poor reflection on the network. Viewers demanded an apology, some even calling for his resignation. For a man who had built his career on edgy humor, it was a harsh wake-up call. Finally, days after the confrontation, the host released a public statement. Sitting in front of the camera during his live broadcast, he looked noticeably humbled. "I want to take a moment to address something important," he began, his tone somber. "Last week I made a joke about Barron Trump that, in hindsight, was inappropriate and hurtful. While I've always used humor as a way to tackle tough subjects, I crossed a line. And for that, I sincerely apologize. To Barron, to his family, and to anyone who felt disrespected." The apology was met with mixed reactions. Some applauded the host for taking accountability, while others saw it as too little, too late. Regardless, the incident left an indelible mark on his career and on the broader conversation about respect in public discourse. For Barron, the apology wasn't the closure he needed. He hadn't stood up to the host for personal vindication. He had done it because he believed in setting an example, in showing that no one, regardless of age or status, should be treated as a punchline. Weeks later, as the media frenzy began to die down, Barron found himself reflecting on the experience. Sitting in his room, he scrolled through the messages of support he had received from strangers around the world. One in particular stood out. "You reminded us all that even in the face of disrespect, dignity and strength win. Thank you for being a role model." Barron smiled faintly, setting his phone aside. The experience had changed him, not in a way that made him seek the spotlight, but in a way that made him realize the importance of using his voice. He wasn't just Barron Trump, the youngest son of a former president. He was someone capable of making a difference. And this was only the beginning. As he looked out the window at the city skyline, he felt a sense of quiet determination. The world had seen a glimpse of his strength, but he knew there was more to come. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. But if there was one thing he had learned, it was this. When you stand up for what's right, you never stand alone. If Barron's story inspired you, don't forget to like and subscribe. The power to make a difference starts with one voice, and yours could be next. The confrontation between Barron Trump and the late-night host became more than just a viral moment. It sparked a nationwide conversation. Schools discussed the importance of respect and empathy in classrooms. Families debated over dinner tables about the boundaries of humor and where the line between comedy and cruelty should be drawn. Even celebrities began weighing in, with some supporting Barron's bold stance and others defending the host's right to free speech. Barron, however, stayed out of the public eye in the weeks following the incident. He declined interview requests, choosing instead to focus on his schoolwork and personal projects. But behind the scenes, he was working on something much bigger, a campaign to turn the negative experience into a positive impact. One afternoon, Melania found him sitting at the dining table, surrounded by papers, his laptop open and notes scrawled in his neat handwriting. "What are you working on?" she asked, setting down a tray of snacks. Barron looked up, his expression serious but determined. I want to start an initiative, he said. Something that teaches young people how to handle situations like this, how to stand up for themselves without resorting to anger or hate. Melania smiled softly, her pride evident. That's a wonderful idea, she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Your strength has already inspired so many. This will only make that impact stronger. With the help of his family and a small team of advisors, Barron launched his initiative, called Voices of Respect. The program aimed to create workshops in schools and communities, teaching kids and teens how to communicate effectively, handle conflict gracefully, and build a culture of kindness and understanding. The launch event, held at a packed auditorium, was a resounding success. Barron stood on stage speaking with the same calm confidence that had captivated millions during his confrontation with the host. Respect isn't about agreeing with everyone, he told the audience. It's about recognizing someone's humanity, even when you disagree. And it starts with us. The applause was thunderous, and the initiative quickly gained traction. Schools across the country signed up for the program, and donations poured in to support its expansion. What had started as a painful moment for Barron had grown into a movement that resonated far beyond anything he could have imagined. Even the late-night host, who had apologized on air, reached out privately to commend Barron for his efforts. You turned this into something bigger than either of us, the host admitted in a letter. For that, I have nothing but respect. As time passed, the incident faded from the headlines, but the impact of Voices of Respect continued to grow. Barron's quiet determination had turned a moment of mockery into a movement of change, proving that even the youngest voices could make a difference. Sitting in his room one evening, Barron scrolled through the initiative's website, reading testimonials from kids who had participated in the workshops. One message stood out. Because of this program, I learned how to stand up for myself without being scared. Thank you for showing me that even when people try to bring you down, you can rise above it. Barron leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. He had faced ridicule and turned it into a lesson, not just for himself, but for countless others. And as he stared out at the city lights, he knew this was just the beginning of what he could achieve. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Every voice matters, and together, we can make the world a more respectful place. Stay tuned for more stories that remind us of the power of standing tall, no matter what.